forgot to switch back. That's my hardest to read translation, but it does have some cool stuff in it. All right, let me come back. Nahum chapter 1, verse 2, the Christian Standard Bible. I knew that was going to have to happen eventually. The Lord is a jealous and avenging God. The Lord takes vengeance and is fierce in wrath. The Lord takes vengeance against his foes. He is furious with his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger, but great in power. The Lord will never leave the guilty unpunished. His path in the whirlwind and storm. His path is in the whirlwind and storm, and clouds are the dust beneath his feet. So Nahum's entire book of prophecy is a poem, a series of poems. You can almost make it into an acrostic poem. It would be an incomplete acrostic. It doesn't contain all the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, but it almost pulls off being an acrostic. And in the beginning here, he does something really interesting. The opening of Zephaniah does some cool stuff too. In the beginning, he does something interesting. He quotes from Exodus when he says that the Lord is slow to anger, but will not leave evil unpunished. Off the top of any of your heads, do you know what's going on in Exodus when that imagery, when that statement gets shared? It's okay if you don't off the top of your head. Can you put it at a setting at least? Can you think about where they might be when he's saying this? Where would you guess? The Lord God, is slow to anger, but cannot let evil go unpunished. You look like you wanted to say something. Huh? Afraid to? Don't be afraid. It's okay. We'll put an answer in your head. I won't torture you much longer. Sinai. This was at Sinai after they built the golden calf. So, whether the people of Nineveh would understand this reference or not, he's directly invoking one of God's first major punishments against his own people for their pride and for their idolatry, and he's leveling it against Nineveh. And he challenges us to understand this dual nature of God. A God who is patient, a God who loves his creation, a God who's slow to anger, but also a God that cannot let oppression and evil stand. So love and justice are held in tension at the beginning of this book. Interestingly, in old Hebrew Bibles, Nineveh isn't actually mentioned anywhere in verse 1. Somewhere it came to become part of the manuscript. Nineveh doesn't actually get mentioned until chapter 2, but based off that, you can kind of retroactively read Nineveh into chapter 1. But there's some broader perspectives here. So for example, in chapter 1, verses 8 through 9, and chapter 14 verse 14 in chapter 1, some of the language that Nahum uses is extremely similar to the language Isaiah uses describing the fall of Babylon. Now, either Isaiah was similar to Nahum or Nahum was similar to Isaiah, depending on which one actually came first. But there's similar language going on again. Happens again in chapter 1 and verse 15, when he speaks of Assyria's downfall as good for the remnant. That's exactly what Isaiah says about Babylon's downfall in Isaiah chapter 52, round about verse 7 or 8. Right. And so, yes, you're right on. And what this does, this kind of thematic repetitive language is it creates this pattern in the prophets. And it's not only with Isaiah, it's just easiest to find it in Isaiah because we've been there recently. Is it makes Assyria part of like this long line of violent empires and reminds us that God doesn't take kindly to arrogance, cruelty, oppression in any age. Whether he's talking to the people of Assyria, whether he's talking to the people of Israel, whether he's talking to the people of Babylon, or later, when we see some prophecies directed at the Medo-Persians, this type of imagery keeps coming back. God despises oppression, violence, cruelty. And so you can take this section that doesn't really name Nineveh by name, and you could plug it into any of the other prophets who are prophesying against the arrogant or the cruel nations, and it would fit perfectly. Because God is consistent. Then Nahum only has one other section. Chapters 2 and 3 are one long section describing the fall of Nineveh and the fall of the Assyrian Empire. And for a example text, we're only going to read the end of chapter 3. So chapter 3, I'm just going to read verses 18 and 19. King of Assyria, your shepherds slumber, your officers sleep, your people are scattered across the mountains with no one to gather them together. There is no remedy for your injury. Your wound is severe. All who hear the news about you will clap their hands because of you, for who has not experienced your constant cruelty? And that's the way this book ends. It's a serious downer of a book. Nahum announces woe upon the city starting in chapter 2. Much like Isaiah's woes upon Jerusalem in his book. He says that the city was built on the blood of the innocent, that their very foundation is injustice and cruelty, and that they relied on that cruelty to become great in their eyes. And God says, because that was your path to greatness, I will tear you down. He says that those that they violently oppressed will return their violence. That violence begets violence. And then this book ends with this picture of this unnamed Assyrian king. It's this picture of the king suffering a fatal wound. And he wants help, but none come to his aid. Instead, those he oppressed, the only people who would be there to help, celebrate his death. He took what he wanted through violence, intimidation, and oppression, and now he dies alone, unloved, with no one to mourn him. Nahum here gets to be the ghost of Christmas is yet to come. Only there's no heartwarming, boy, what day is this after this? And I'm picturing Albert Finney in my head because the one true adaptation of A Christmas Carol is the Muppet version. It's the best. As my final little note on this book, a book called The Interpreter's Bible, Volume 6, that a man named Charles L. Taylor contributed to. He had this to say about the book of Nahum. after saying that it's not a book that we would turn to usually to see like hope. It doesn't follow the balance of many of the other prophets, but he does say it is one of the world's classic rebukes of militarism. All tyrants are doomed. They make enemies of those whom they attack and oppress. Then they become corrupt, dissolute, and drunken. They are lulled into false security. And that's Nahum in a nutshell. Anything else you want to chat about Nahum before we jump over to Zephaniah? Zephaniah's got a tad bit more hope in it. All right, let's jump to Zephaniah. Now, Zephaniah, whoops, didn't make it up to my notes in the right place. Here we are. He was prophesying during the reign of Josiah, so a couple kings back, right? Actually, a pretty good king, one of the better kings, in fact. I easily put him in the top 3 of the divided kingdom. But during that time, there was Josiah, a prophet, still prophesying judgment upon Jerusalem. Again, author, don't know. It's recorded as the words of the prophet, but again, did the prophet write it? Did a scribe write it? Did a disciple write it? There's no indication. And the audience of the book is Jerusalem and Judah. And the big idea of Zephaniah is that God has to, this is kind of similar to the beginning of Amos, not Amos, what did we just say? I'm getting my prophets mixed up, Nahum. The big idea of Zephaniah is that God has 2 aspects to his character that we have to harmonize, justice and love. Together, those qualities of God bring hope to the world. All right? So a couple sample readings here. We're going to start in the first section of Zephaniah, which starts in chapter 1 and bleeds a little bit into chapter 2, and that's God's judgment on Jerusalem and Judah. And I'm going to read Zephaniah, if I can find it here. Oh, it's 2 books after Nahum. So if you found that in your Bible, you're not far from Zephaniah. There we go. I'm going to read verses 2 and 3 here of chapter 1. I learned my lesson from last time that picking like 5 and 10 verse passages was going to run us out of time in these prophets. I will completely sweep away everything from the face of the earth. This is the Lord's declaration. I will sweep away people and animals. I will sweep away the birds of the sky and the fish of the sea and the ruins along with the wicked. I will cut off mankind from the face of the earth. This is the Lord's declaration. So that's a pretty strong statement to start with. I'm going to hop over to chapter 2 and read the first 3 verses of that now. So Zephaniah 2, 1 through 3. Gather yourselves together. Gather together, undesirable nation, before the decree takes effect and the day passes like chaff, before the burning of the Lord's anger overtakes you. Before the Lord's anger overtakes you, seek the Lord, all you humble of the earth, who carry out what he commands. Seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you will be concealed on the day of the Lord's anger. So section 1, like the prophet that we just read, Nahum, just like Nahum starts with this like callback to Israel's history in the words the prophet uses, Zephaniah also does a callback right in the beginning. When he says in chapter 1, I will sweep away people and animals. I will sweep away birds of the sky and the fish of the sea. Let me take the sweep away parts out of this and see what it makes you think of. See if you make the connection. If I start talking about people and animals, the birds of the sky, the fish of the sea, what does that sound like? John? He is. He's going to clean house. Right. He is going to clean house. Okay, the flood. Yeah, there's definitely shadows of the flood there. Think back a little bit farther. Where do we read the first time of? Zephaniah here is doing a reverse creation. In fact, he's going through these things in reverse order from Genesis. But instead of saying God is creating them, he is saying God is sweeping them away. He is intentionally putting their heads into the creation story and saying God is going to uncreate. Is that a word? Is going to uncreate you. And the purpose of this is to show through this poetic language how Jerusalem's world is going to come crashing down around them. Further on in these chapters, we see some themes of condemnation that we've seen in the other prophets, that we've seen in Micah, that we've seen in Isaiah, that we've seen in others. You know, leaders who perpetuate injustice. He condemns predatory lending by the wealthy to the poor. He condemns economic cruelty. Now, interestingly, Zephaniah doesn't actually identify who's going to carry Jerusalem away. The focus isn't on Babylon here. Micah, Isaiah, they name drop Babylon in their prophecies. Zephaniah doesn't. He keeps his audience focused on God's role in this. But there's hope. But it's a different hope than we've seen before. Micah, Isaiah, I think Amos, they said things like, if you will turn back to the Lord and repent, then this great and bad thing isn't going to happen. Then God will relent, and your cities will be fine, and your crops will be fine. I'm heavily paraphrasing. That doesn't quote anyone exactly. But that's a lot of the idea in Isaiah and Micah and some of the earlier prophets that predict destruction. Zephaniah gives hope, but not that. Did you catch that in chapter 2, verses 1 through 3? Turn back to God basically says, before time runs out, before this destruction comes, and seek righteousness, seek humility, and perhaps you will be concealed on the day of the Lord's anger. Now the hope isn't the destruction might not come. Now the hope is you will be spared, but the destruction is still coming. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so section 2, we're not going to do any readings from section 2. It's the rest of chapter 4 into the beginning of chapter 3. And it's basically what we saw in Micah. Amos follows almost the same structure. Not Amos. Why are we in Zephaniah? We've done too many prophets in rapid succession, y'all. And I cannot keep them straight even when I'm in the middle of teaching them. Zephaniah follows roughly the same structure as Micah. Judgment on God's people, judgment on the nations, message of future hope. That's the big picture of Zephaniah. So right here, this is, he comes after the Philistines, the Moabites, the Ammonites, and the Assyrians. But what's interesting in this passage is he's like, you Moabites, you Philistines, you Ammonites, you Assyrians, one after another, you're wicked in this way, you're terrible. I shall take down your cedars, I shall take down your walls. And then at the end of this section, he comes back to Judah and Jerusalem. And I can almost picture, because I'm not assuming all of these prophecies were done on the same day. I can almost picture this one, starting with him talking about those other nations. And I can picture the crowds growing around him. Yeah, you stick it to those Moabites. Yeah, you tell those Assyrians. Oh yeah, those Philistines, they definitely deserve that. You tell them, they're getting what's coming to them. You tell them. And then he lands on Judah and Jerusalem. All of the condemnations, all of the bad things that he said about Assyria and Moab and Ammon, the Philistines, he says, oh, God's people, they apply to you too. You are the same. He says that their leaders, their prophets, and their priests. By the way, there's that holy triumvirate right there, prophet, priest, and king. He says their prophets, priests, and kings are violent, that they're corrupt, and they know not God. They are estranged from God. So all of that punishment that you all were cheering on, coming after those nations you don't like, you're no different from them. So what do you expect? And then we end up with chapter 3. And this is really interesting because chapter 3, verse 8 talks about God coming like a fire into Judah and Jerusalem. But then verse 9 creates this tonal whiplash. I'm actually going to back up to verse 8 here. Not all of verse 8, the end of verse 8. And I'm going to read, I don't mean 9 through 20. Surely I mean 3 through 11. No, 12. I mean 12. Whew. I wrote the wrong thing down in my own reading. I'm going to start at the end of verse 8. All my burning anger for for my decision is to gather nations, to assemble kingdoms, in order to pour out my indignation on them. All my burning, there's that fire imagery, anger. For the whole earth will be consumed by the fire of my jealousy, for I will then restore pure speech to the peoples, so that all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him with a single purpose. From beyond the rivers of Cush, my supplicants, my dispersed people, will bring an offering to me. On that day you will not be put to shame because of everything you have done in rebelling against me, for then I will remove from among you your jubilant, arrogant people. A more literal Hebrew translation might say, those who rejoice in arrogance. On my holy mountain, I will leave a meek and humble people among you, and they will take refuge in the name of the Lord. The remnant of Israel will no longer do wrong or tell lies. A deceitful tongue will not be found in their mouths. They will pasture and lie down with nothing to make them afraid. So at the height of this picture of God being a consuming fire, and he's setting us up to see this fire as this destructive, overwhelming force, Micah flips the script. Not Micah, Zephaniah flips the script and says, this fire will purify his people, and not just his people, but all who then come to the mountain of the Lord. It will purify their thoughts, it will purify their words, it'll purify their actions. No longer will they be arrogant, but instead they will be humble and seek after the Lord. Micah ends on this prophetic message of hope. And the book concludes at the very end of chapter 3, with God gathering into his family. And that's what he calls them in Zephaniah, a family. He says, I gather the outcast, the refugee, the poor, and the broken, and will exalt those to a place of honor. And that's where Micah ends, tearing down the proud and lifting up the humble and the oppressed. Yeah. Yeah, and it's like this anger and this sadness, but also tinged with hope. That, yes, this terrible thing is going to happen, But God knows on the other end, there's something better coming. There's something better coming. A kingdom that's not defined by all of the stuff that his people have been defining kingdom by. A kingdom that's going to have a prophet, priest, and king who won't be able to be corrupted, who won't show favoritism, and who will be as humble as the people he serves. And now let's hop over to 2 Kings in the last few minutes we have. And I'm going to go ahead and read this section, even though it might take us close to the end. But that's okay. It's actually a pretty short read, so hop with me over to 2 Kings. We're going to start towards the end of chapter 23. We're going to start in chapter 23, verse 31. So this is after Josiah has died in battle. And chronologically, Zephaniah, who we just talked about, has been prophesying up to this point. Then Jehoaz, this guy is Josiah's son. Jehoaz was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal, daughter of Jeremiah. She was from Libnah. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight, just as his ancestors had done. Pharaoh Necho imprisoned him at Riblah in the land of Hamath to keep him from reigning in Jerusalem, and he imposed on the land a fine of 7,500 pounds of silver and 75 pounds of gold. Then Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, son of Josiah, king in place of his father, Josiah, and changed Eliakim's name to Jehoiakim. I would have really liked to just keep Eliakim because that would keep the names more distinct. But Necho took Jehoahaz and went to Egypt, and he died there, as in Jehoahaz died there, not Necho. I'm sure he died there eventually. So Jehoiakim gave the silver and the gold to Pharaoh, but at Pharaoh's command, he taxed the land to give it. He exacted the silver and gold from the common people, each according to their assessment, and gave it to Pharaoh Necho. Now Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zebedah, daughter of Pedaiah, and she was from Rumah. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight, just as his ancestors had done. Now during Jehoiakim's reign, so still the same king, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon attacked. Jehoiakim became his vassal for 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. The Lord sent Chaldean, Aramaean, Moabite, and Ammonite raiders against Jehoiakim. He sent them against Judah to destroy it according to the word of the Lord he had spoken through his servants, the prophets. Indeed, this happened to Judah at the Lord's command to remove them from his presence. It was because of the sins of Manasseh, according to all he had done, and also because of all the innocent blood he had shed. He had filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord was not willing to forgive. The rest of the events of Jehoiakim's reign, along with all his accomplishments, are written in the historical record of Judah's kings. Jehoiakim rested with his ancestors, and his son Jehoiachin became king in his place. Now the king of Egypt did not march out of his land again, for the king of Babylon took everything that had belonged to the king of Egypt, from the brook of Egypt to the Euphrates River. Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he became king. He reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Nehushta, daughter of Elhanan. She was from Jerusalem. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight, just as his father had done. At that time, the servants of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon marched up to Jerusalem, and the city came under siege. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to the city while his servants were besieging it. King Jehoiachin of Judah, along with his mother, his servants, his commanders, and his officials, surrendered to the king of Babylon. So the king of Babylon took him captive in the 8th year of his reign. Let me clarify the hymns and his in there. So the king of Babylon took Jehoiachin captive in the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. The first time I read that, I read it as like Jehoiachin served for 3 months, but then got picked off during the 8th year of his reign. What? He also carried off from there all the treasures of the Lord's temple and the treasures of the king's palace. He cut into pieces all the gold articles that King Solomon of Israel had made for the Lord's sanctuary, just as the Lord had predicted. He deported all Jerusalem and all the commanders and all the best soldiers, 10,000 captives, including all the craftsmen and metalsmith, except for the poorest people of the land. No one remained. And we're going to stop there because the rest of this passage is a recap of what just happened. And then the last bit is Sir King we're going to talk about on Sunday. And there's bell number 1. So we go through a fairly quick succession of kings there. 3 months, 11 years, 3 months. The ones that lasted 3 months still managed to get the moniker that they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. One of them, I read over it on accident and thought, oh, he didn't even last long enough to get an epitaph of how he, oh, never mind, it's right there. And then the guy who was there for 11 years spent most of his time in service to the Pharaoh Necho, or the king of Egypt. I don't know if they were calling them pharaohs at this point in history. I needed to double check that, and I didn't. And then spent the last part of his reign as a vassal to Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon, the guy who's going to destroy Jerusalem. Now, if you're a curious Bible student, you might have looked over at the parallel passage in 2 Kings, and you saw that one of the kings was 8 years old when he took the throne, but 2 Chronicles said he was 8, 2 Kings said he's 18. Probably a clerical error at some point copying the text. Most current rabbis lean toward the 18, only because of the things he was doing. But that's that. That's really neither here nor there, but if that question was in your mind at all. So, yeah. The big thing here is Nebuchadnezzar's doing exactly what was prophesied, down to what Isaiah had told Hezekiah back in 2 Kings chapter 20. All of this that you show them, the gold in the temple, the gold that Solomon made for the temple, the gold in your treasury, the king of Babylon is going to carry it away. That's exactly what he did. Right, with this first group of people who get pulled away, this is when Daniel gets hauled off to Babylon. I don't have him up on our list of prophets yet, but yes, he should be right above Ezekiel and Jeremiah, his story starts not too long after Jeremiah's block ends. But yeah, good connection there. Thanks. Okay. Is there? I forgot about that if there is. Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. We're going to be discussing Jeremiah. We are not going to be discussing Daniel this quarter. That's probably for the best. If they wanted us to get through Daniel in one class, it would not happen. But, okay. That's a cool connection. But go ahead, Glenn.
Daniel's one of the main characters. Well, the divided kingdom is covered in this quarter. Daniel is one of those few main characters
Uh-huh.
that the first
Yeah.
than Daniel. And Daniel, from Jeremiah, Jeremiah is the one who says you'll be in Babylon for 70
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. Right. Thank you. Yeah. So we've got these great connections with these people, and the big picture again is God cares about that we worship him in spirit and truth, but time and again in these prophets, he also cares about the kinds of people we are. And the way we treat the least fortunate around us tells God exactly the type of people we are. In the great picture of the judgment in Matthew 25, when Jesus rattles off and separates people from right to left, how does he separate them? Those of you who, that you've done to the least of these. He doesn't separate them by, you kept this law, you kept that law, you kept this law, you didn't keep that law, you didn't keep that law. You sat with, you healed, you cared for, or you didn't. God doesn't change. He still cares who we are. And that's where we're going to leave it for right now. And we're going to end up with no Jerusalem next time we're together on Sunday. So thanks for your participation. I hope you all have a safe drive home. Thanks. It's always entertaining when it's like